Shri Rajalakshmi Prakashan published. A textbook on fundamentals of agronomy 1. Authors: Dr. D. N. Jagtap, Dr. P. B. Pawar, Dr. U. V. Mahadkar. Chapter 17. Crop harvesting, signs of maturity in different field crops, physiological and crop maturity, methods of threshing crops, cleaning, drying and storage of field crops. Harvesting, it is the removal of entire plants or economic parts, grain, seed, leaf, root or entire plant, after maturity from the field. Harvesting is the process of gathering a ripe crop from the fields. Time of harvesting: if the crop is harvested early, the produce contains high moisture and more immature grains. Higher moisture results shriveling of seed and infestation of pests. The immature grains lead to low yields and reduce quality as well as germination percent. Late harvesting results in shattering of grains, germination when it rains and breaking during processing. Hence, harvesting at correct time essential to get good quality grains and higher yield. Crops can be harvested at physiological or harvest maturity. Crop is considered to be at physiological maturity when the translocation of photosynthesis is stopped to economic part. Physiological maturity refers to a developmental stage after which no further increase in dry matter occurs in the economical part. This is important only when a field is to be vacated for sowing another crop, otherwise, one should go for harvesting the crop at harvest maturity. Harvest maturity generally occurs 7 days after physiological maturity with following symptoms: loss of moisture in grains up to 12 to 14%, yellowing and dropping of leaves, drying and change in color of grains or pods. Life cycle completes which vary with crop to crop and variety. Methods of harvesting. Harvesting of crops is done by different ways depending on the crop. Number 1. Cutting. Cutting of the crop with sickles leaving small stubbles near the ground is the common method of harvesting. This method is followed in the crops where maturity is almost uniform. The sickle used for harvesting should be sharp, curved and serrated for efficient harvesting. Sometimes the ear heads of cobs, i.e. only economic produce, are to be cut from the stem. In case of leafy vegetables, the produce is uprooted from the soil. Number 2. Picking. In indeterminate plants, harvesting is done at intervals as the economic product comes to maturity at different period. Pods or fruits or cotton balls are picked or removed at periodical interval is called as picking. Sometimes in pulses whole crop is cut or uprooted when 75% of pods are matured. Number 3. Digging. The underground crops are harvested by digging with the help of kudali, plough or harrows. Sometimes tractor-drawn sweep cultivators with inverted V-shaped blades are also used to harvest groundnut. Number 4. Mechanical harvesting. Tractor-driven harvested or combine harvester or simple combines are used for harvesting. Combines performs several operations like cutting the crop, separating the grain from straw, cleaning it from chaff and transport the grains to the storage tank. Signs of maturity in different crops. Point A. Cereals. 1. Lower leaves turn to yellow straw. 2. Lower and other leaves fall down. 3. Stem turn to straw color. 4. Pith formation in stem takes place. 5. Grains become hard and fully developed. 6. Moisture percent in grain becomes less than 20% on total weight basis. 7. In madge, drying of cob sheath and fibers take place. Point B. Cotton. Fully opened and bursted balls. Point C. Pulses. 1. Pods turn to brown. 2. Grains become hard. 3. Shading of lower older leaves take place. 4. Yellowing of leaves. Point D. Sugarcane. 1. Yellowish color to crop. 2. Flowering. 3. Swelling of eye buds. 4. Sweetness of juice. 5. Reads 21 to 24 bricks saccharometer reading. Point E. Groundnut. 1. Drying of vines. 2. Black coloring to the inner side of pod's shell. 3. Reddening or dark coloration to the seed coat. 4. Prominent margins on pod. Point F. Potato. 1. Dropping of leaves and drying. 2. Hardening of tuber. Determination of harvesting date is easier for determinate crops and difficult for indeterminate crops as it contains flower, immature and mature pods. Therefore, such crop should be harvested when 75% maturity is achieved or periodical harvesting should be done. Physiological and crop maturity. Physiological maturity is defined as the time when dry matter accumulation in the kernels or seeds ceases, in other words the grain stops filling. Or physiological maturity refers to a developmental stage after which no further increase in dry matter occurs in the economical part. Black layer formation at the tip of the kernel is a good indicator of physiological maturity in corn and grain sorghum. For soybeans, physiological maturity has been reached when one normal pod on the main stem has reached its mature pod color. For sunflower, physiological maturity has been reached when the bracts turn brown. After physiological maturity, the crop will no longer respond to irrigation or rainfall. Crop maturity generally occurs 7 days after physiological maturity. Threshing. Threshing is the process of loosening the edible part of cereal grain or other crop from the husks and straw to which it is attached. It is the step in grain preparation after reaping and before winnowing which separates the grain from the chaff. Threshing does not remove the bran from the grain. Methods of threshing crops. Threshing can be done manually or mechanically. Manual threshing. The manual methods of threshing are treading by feet, flail method, and beating stalks against tubs, boards or racks. Threshing can be done by trampling using bullocks, rubbing with bare human feet in hills, or lifting the bundles and striking them on the raised wooden platform. Pedal threshers are also used. Freshly threshed produce must be dried well in the sun. Machine threshing. Mechanical threshing removes grains from the plants, speeds up threshing, thus reducing losses and reduces labor requirements. Power-driven stationary threshers are also used. Freshly threshed produce must be dried well in the sun. Cleaning. Wind winnowing is defined as a method in which heavier components of the mixture are separated from the lighter substances with the help of wind. Winnowing is an agricultural method developed by ancient cultures for separating grain from chaff. It is also used to remove weevils or other pests from stored grain. In its simplest form, it involves throwing the mixture into the air so that the wind blows away the lighter chaff, while the heavier grains fall back down for recovery. Techniques included using a winnowing fan, a shaped basket shaken to raise the chaff, or using a tool, a winnowing fork or shovel, on a pile of harvested grain. Winnowing is the method in which heavier components of the mixture are separated from the lighter substances with the help of wind. This method is used for separating grains from husk after the process of threshing. Threshing is the process of separating grain from chaff. In this process, a mixture of wheat and husk is dropped from a height. After that, husk is carried by the wind and forms a heap at some distance away. The husk being lighter is carried away by the wind and forms a different heap. The heavier particle, wheat grains, forms a separate heap as it falls vertically downward. To separate dirt from pulses, we add water to pulses. Dirt will get dissolved in water and husk will float on top because it is lighter and pulse grains will settle down. Cleaning techniques range from the traditional winnowing of crops by throwing them into the air to the use of sophisticated, modern, high-output equipment. The two techniques used on small farms are winnowing and sieving. Sieving is usually a two-stage operation. The first sieve is just coarse enough to let the grain through while rejecting all larger particles. The second sieve is just fine enough to hold the grain being cleaned, but it passes weed seeds and particles that are smaller than the grain. Grain may sometimes be given a preliminary cleaning prior to storage to remove the majority of contaminants, and then a second, more thorough, cleaning before sale. This would apply in particular to seed grain. Advantage of winnowing. This method doesn't require any machines for its functioning. It is completely based on human activity, and hence it takes less time to process and definitely very cheap. Disadvantage of winnowing. This process does not work for materials heavier than grains like stones. Drying and storage of field crops. The food produced in one harvest period, which may last for only a few weeks, must be stored for gradual consumption until the next harvest, and seed must be held for the next season's crop. In addition, in a market that is not controlled, the value of any surplus crop tends to rise during the off-season period, provided that it is in a marketable condition. Therefore, the principal aim of any storage system must be to maintain the crop in prime condition for as long as possible. The storage and handling methods should minimize losses, but must also be appropriate in relation to other factors, such as economies of scale, labor cost and availability, building costs and machinery cost. Grain drying. Various types of storage structures and systems, from family size up to commercial units, are available for preventing damage during the storage period. Drying systems. The range of systems available for drying grains varies from thin layer drying in the sun or a simple match crib to expensive mechanized systems such as continuous flow dryers. The choice is governed by a number of factors, including rate of harvest. The capacity of the system must be able to keep pace with the rate at which the grain arrives at the store on a daily basis. It is essential that loading and drying does not hold up the harvest. Total volume to be dried. This may not be the total volume of the crop. If harvesting normally starts as the rainy season is ending, it may be necessary to dry the early part of the harvest, but not the later part. Storage system. In many cases, the storage system and the drying system may be the same structure. For example, a ventilated match crib, used for drying the crop naturally, is likely to be used to store the shelled crop in bags later. Some bin drying systems have a similar dual purpose. Cost. Both capital cost and running cost should be taken into account. Flexibility. The likelihood of different crops requiring drying should be considered. Drying systems fall into two main groups: natural drying using ambient air temperature and either direct sunlight or natural air movement through the crop. Artificial drying using mechanical means. Example: a fan to move air through the crop, with the air being either at ambient temperature or artificially heated. Additionally, drying can be considered in terms of the thickness of the bed of grain being dried, that is, either shallow layer or thin layer drying or deep bed drying. Natural drying requires the grain to be in shallow layers, whereas certain fans can push air through grain several meters deep. Natural drying. The traditional methods used by farmers for drying grain rely on natural air movement to reduce moisture content to a safe level for storage. In addition, they may utilize the extra drying capacity gained by exposing the produce to the sun. With good ventilation through the store, the grain can be harvested just after it is ripe, around 30% moisture content for mash, but most methods allow some of the drying to take place naturally while the crop is still standing in the field. Natural drying may be divided in three main methods. Drying in the field before harvesting. Drying in shallow layers and exposing to sun and wind on a surface that prevents moisture from the ground from reaching the produce. Drying in or on a structure that has open sides to permit air movement through the mass. Field drying. The method of leaving the crop standing in the field for drying is popular in areas where maturity of the crop coincides with the beginning of a dry season. However, a crop left unharvested is exposed to attack by insects, birds, rodents, wild animals, strong winds and occasional rain showers, which can damage and reduce the crop considerably. These factors are particularly important with the new, improved high-yielding crop varieties, which are often more susceptible to damage from the environment than the traditional varieties. For instance, a hybrid Madge cob has less leaf cover than the cob of traditional Madge varieties and is therefore more open to attack by insects and birds. Field drying of the crop will also delay clearing of the field. This should be taken into account in areas where the field needs to be prepared for a second rainy season, or where the humidity is high enough at the end of the growing season to allow for an additional crop, such as beans. It is also not feasible in irrigated fields where higher cropping intensity requires early and/or timely harvesting. Artificial drying. If the air humidity is too high to allow grain to be dried adequately by natural means and storage methods do not facilitate further drying, it is necessary to dry the produce using forced air or heat, or a combination of both. Various local methods have been developed using available materials. In some areas, storage is restricted to the amount that can be dried on a heat supply similar to that available from a kitchen fire. Panicles of paddy and madge stored on horizontal grids are kept dry by heat from a fire lit occasionally underneath the grid, and the heap of panicles is turned at regular intervals to prevent the development of mold. There are also raised granaries beneath which fires are lit to complete the drying process. The produce acquires a characteristic odor and flavor when exposed directly to smoke from the fire as well as to the hot, dry air. This problem is overcome by using dryers designed with a hot air chamber or heat exchange unit and smoke stack or chimney. The fire is lit at the mouth of the oil barrel tube, and hot air and smoke is exhausted via the chimney. The heated barrels in turn heat the surrounding air, which rises through the crop. When heat is used to dry grain, there must be some provision for aeration as well. Either very thin layers or frequent stirring is advisable, as natural convection currents seldom move enough air. Drying problems. Over-drying grain using excessive temperatures can cause stresses in the individual kernels, leading to cracking and loss of viability. Another effect of over-drying is that all moisture lost below the safe storage moisture content represents a loss in the value of the crop when the grain is sold. For example, 10 tons of grain at 15% moisture content weighs 340 kilograms less at 12% moisture content. Air short-circuiting means that the air will always take the path of least resistance, which, in the case of grain, is usually the shortest route possible through a batch. Dirty crops, such as grain with a large proportion of chaff, fine seeds and dirt, are more difficult to dry because the resistance to airflow increases as the spaces between grains become blocked. Therefore, it is important for the grain to be as clean and uncontaminated as possible. Grain storage. The store must satisfy the following parameters as far as possible. The grain must be kept dry. The grain should be kept at a uniform temperature. The grain should be protected from insect attack. Rodents and birds should be excluded. It is evident from previous sections that, in many cases, facilities for drying and storage are found in one and the same structure. Combining these functions is economical and allows further conditioning at later stages if required. For example, if a hot spot develops in a storage bin, it can easily be ventilated again. It may also be possible to provide some low-volume ventilation in an otherwise pure storage system. However, there are situations where storage is considered quite separately from drying, ranging from the storage of naturally dried crops to the storage of grain from a continuous flow or batch dryer. The size and type of a storage facility is likely to be dictated by total volume of crop produce to be stored, the storage requirements for the crop produce to be stored, the unit cost of various types of storage, the form in which the crop produce is stored, that is, cob madge versus shelled madge, or bagged wheat versus bulk wheat. The volume of the store required can be estimated from the expected yield and the land area. A comparison between different forms of storage is normally made by calculating costs per ton of capacity. The form of storage depends not only on how the crop is harvested, the volume and the way it is delivered to the market, but also on the overall cost. Where drying is a problem, bag storage has the advantage of allowing a higher moisture content than bulk storage. For madge, the requirement for safe storage is a maximum of 15% and 12% moisture content respectively. In general terms, the respective advantages and disadvantages of bag and bulk storage are: bags, flexibility of storage; bulk, inflexible storage; bags, partly mechanizable; bulk, mechanizable; bags, slow handling; bulk, rapid handling; bags, considerable spillage; bulk, little spillage; bags, low capital costs; bulk, high capital costs; bags, high operating costs; bulk, low operating costs; bags, easy inspection; bulk, inspection more difficult. Solid wall bins and silos for bulk storage. Solid wall bins may be anything from a small plastered basket to large steel or concrete silos holding several thousand tons. The traditional bins used by African farmers are small with a capacity of 2 to 3 tons, including gourds, clay pots, mud-plastered baskets raised off the ground and mud-walled silos, rumbas. Many of these solid wall bins or silos have limitations, particularly in terms of durability and protection against rodents, insects and moisture from ambient air. Solid wall bins or silos should be used only in areas where the produce can be dried sufficiently prior to storage. Several attempts have been made to improve on traditional stores to make them more suitable for long-term storage. Improved traditional bins. Many traditional stores perform excellently in their appropriate climatic conditions, and others can be made to do so with minor changes. Efforts should be made to prevent cracking of the surface of the walls and to seal the entrance to the bin. This can be done, for instance, by adding lime or cement to the mud, that is, a stabilized soil technique, or by incorporating an airtight lining, example, plastic, in the wall. The major improvements are: the floor is raised above the ground to avoid moisture. Supporting legs of hardwood are made 90 centimeters long and equipped with baffles to protect against rats. Instead of mud, the walls may be plastered with cement or mud mixed with cement lime. Inlets and outlets should be made with airtight and lockable covers. Thatched roof to protect the bin from rain and strong sun. The area around the store should be kept clean. Underground pits in a few countries, example, India, parts of Africa and Latin America, it is claimed that underground pits are able to store grain without damage for many years. The pits keep grain cool, and some of them are relatively airtight. However, the grain on top and around the sides often becomes moldy. There are several types of pit, most of them flask-shaped and covered with sticks, cow dung and mud, or a large stone embedded in soft mud. The area should be free from termites and relatively dry. Improvements to the pit may include better lining of straw and mat, plastic sheets and concrete or ferrocement, use of plastic bags in the pit, improved covering, surface drainage, bag storage. The most commonly used method of grain storage in many countries is bag storage in any of a variety of buildings, example, stone, local brick, corrugated iron and mud and wattle, with or without plastered walls, and with an earth, stone or cement floor and a corrugated iron or thatched roof. As mentioned before, the form in which the produce should be stored will depend on the quantity, harvest method, handling method, moisture content and costs. The advantages of bag storage were listed earlier. The disadvantage is that jute bags give no protection against insects, which means that an insecticide has to be used. In some countries with a dry climate, it is common practice to stack the bags on plinths and cover them with a tarpaulin for temporary storage. Examples are the hard stands used in Zambia and the groundnut pyramids used near Kano in northern Nigeria. However, if the grain is to be kept for some time, it is recommended to store the bags in a building. A simple store makes use of the ventilated match crib that is used for drying, the only difference being that the walls should be covered for protection against rain. If the bags are stored in a multipurpose farm shed, or even in the farmer's dwelling, they should be kept out of reach of rats and mice. A raised, freestanding platform equipped with rat guards will serve this purpose. Whatever the size of the bag store, the floor should be made of good quality concrete, the door should fit tightly to protect against rodents, and ventilation openings should be screened to keep out birds. The gaps between the wall and the roofing sheets must be closed using a material such as cement. If fine mesh is used to prevent insects from entering through the ventilation openings, it must be maintained regularly, dust should be brushed away and holes repaired immediately. Storage management. Storage management is important for all types of storage functions. For bag storage, the three main points are: Number 1. Prevent damp, moisture, from the floor and walls reaching the produce by stacking the bags on pallets off the ground and away from the walls. Damp from the roof is avoided through proper ventilation and using damp-absorbing materials. Number 2. Stack the bags properly to allow optimal use of space, ease of sweeping the floors, ease of inspection of produce for rodents and insects, ease of counting the bags. Number 3. Control insects and rodents. Make sure the building is rodent-proof. Treat the building and protect against pests. Keep the warehouse clean. Close all holes in doors, roof, etc. where pests can enter. Repair cracks in walls where pests can hide. Remove and destroy any infested residues that could contaminate newly introduced produce. Bag stacks should be carefully constructed to maximize the use of space, to maintain hygienic conditions and to facilitate good management. If the bags are laid exactly one on top of the other in successive layers, the stack will be extremely unstable. To overcome this, ensure that there is an overlap in each successive layer. Insect control. Losses caused by insects. Weight loss. As insects develop, they will feed on the produce. Losses vary with the commodity. For grain and legumes, losses in the range of 10 to 30% can be expected over the storage season. Loss in quality and market value. Damaged grains will have reduced market value. Promotion of mold development. Respiration water from insects leads to mold formation in poorly ventilated stores. Reduced germination in seed material. Many insects prefer to eat the embryo because it is the most nutritious part of the grain. Reduced nutritional value. Removal of the grain embryo reduces the overall protein content of the grain. Sources of infestation. Insects can survive from one season to the next in infested residues in the field, the structure of the store, natural habitats such as natural vegetation. Fresh produce can be infested by active migration to the crop in the field and store, infested produce placed in the store. Control measures. A wide variety of techniques are used to control insect pests in stored produce, from sunning and smoking at the traditional farm level to irradiation in the largest bulk handling facilities. This paragraph is concerned with various proven techniques suitable for use in small to medium-scale storage under tropical conditions. Specific recommendations are difficult to make. A technique must be tested for a particular situation depending on the value of the crop, the occurrence and resistance of the pest, the farming system used, and the availability of insecticides. When selecting a technique, it is important to consider its effectiveness against the target pests, the hazards to the farmer and the consumer, and whether the result will pay for the cost of treatment. Insect control techniques. Sanitation. Do not mix new grain with old. Old, infested material should be removed or thoroughly fumigated. Clean the storage structures and machinery, and disinfect bags and baskets by sunning or chemical treatment. Large structures will require chemical treatment, while smoke may be adequate for small stores. Natural resistance. Crop varieties differ in their susceptibility to storage pests. Traditional varieties are usually more resistant to storage pests than new varieties. For instance, madge with good husk cover can reduce field infestation. Hermetic storage in airtight conditions, reduced oxygen and increased carbon dioxide will arrest insect and mold development. Chemical control. The traditional method for preserving the crop in storage is to treat the grain with smoke and special plants or, when stored in closed containers, to mix the grain with ash or sand. While this method is widely used for small volumes, such as seed, for larger quantities the method becomes cumbersome. In most cases, chemical control involves the use of an insecticide, which can be applied to the produce in the form of dust, spray and fumigants. In addition to killing the insects, all insecticides are toxic to mammals to varying degrees. The toxicity is usually expressed as a LD50. Technically, this is the dose required, measured in milligrams of active ingredient per kilogram of body weight of the consumer for specific conditions, application method and time span, to kill 50% of the test population, usually rats. Most insecticides do not kill all insects and mites. Choose a chemical that is either broad-spectrum or one that specifies toxicity to moths and beetles. Mites may require special treatment. With regard to persistence, insecticides will tend to lose their effectiveness when exposed to high humidity, high temperatures and sunlight. It is important to apply the insecticide in the correct dosage. Excessive and/or inappropriate use of chemicals will lead to the insects becoming resistant and can be a hazard to human health. Rodent and bird control in stores. Apart from consuming large quantities of stored grain and food, rodents contaminate stored produce through droppings, urine and hairs, and may spread human diseases. Rodent control requires an integrated approach because no single method is completely effective. It should focus on creating an unfavorable environment and excluding rodents from stored grain. Methods used to minimize the damage caused by rodents include good housekeeping, proofing, repelling, trapping, and poisoning. Keeping a cat around a grain store is another effective control method. The requirement for good housekeeping is the same for rodents as for insect control. The store should be kept clean inside and out and be easy to inspect. In the following paragraph, we focus on how construction can be improved to keep rodents out. Birds are likely to be a nuisance in warehouse if no precautions are taken.
We politely request, please like, share and subscribe our channel Sri Raj Lakshmi Publication.